my bones, in my bones, I got a feeling. Something I don't know the name was gonna happen to me today. Nothing's gonna stop that thing from happening.
Just me, or is time really speeding up? Welcome to the Anakypto Forum. It's already the 10th day of October, one day closer to the return of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And it seems like this month just began. But anyway, tomorrow, the 11th, the day of the major, one might think, event in Washington, D.C. And in the meantime, I find it somewhat interesting that we are not seeing any news at all about the Middle East. Nothing about all of the warships from China, Russia, and the United States that are clustered in the eastern part of the Med. Nothing. What a world. On the letters page, I believe there are 4 items that have been posted since last we spoke. Mark Circus, checkmate, game over, rather self-explanatory. What Mark is saying is that the beat will go on. I don't know if he has a prognostication. I don't see a date certain on there, but I think we see the direction that things are going. And I was talking to one of my crack research associates yesterday by email, and while we did not come up with a date certain, we did come up with a fairly compelling reason to believe that we're in a 60 to 90 day window. In fact, 60 might be on the long side. It could be more like 30 to 90 days. I was speaking with our friend Tim Hammond, and Tim was observing that the signal of the end was really given back in September of 2012. Back at that time, Ben Bernanke, who was then running the Federal Reserve, signaled the death of the dollar when he announced quantitative easing 3, QE3, which was an unlimited $45 billion per month with no end date. And then the following month they started QE4, which was an additional $40 billion, also with no end date. That told the world that the dollar was dead. And on John Moore's program last Monday, he announced intelligence from a source that said hundreds of Chinese troops in full battle gear were flown into Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. I don't have a date for that. And I didn't listen to the program. This is simply what Tim communicated to me. And he also cited another source as a Navy SEAL saying there are 14,000 Chinese bulletproof vehicles like Humvees in northern Mexico. On today's program, which would have been yesterday's, John Moore said he had a second source on Chinese being flown into Ohio, and that the two sources did not know each other. So there's corroboration without collaboration. This type of troop movement, according to John, is typical 30 to 60 days before an incursion, possibly up to 90 days, but doubtful. So, Tim's looking for a rapture anytime now, as are many of the rest of us. I am not thinking it's going to be this weekend. I'm still going with Cheshvan 17, 21st day of October. We'll talk on the 22nd if I'm wrong. But I think the Chinese have made their displeasure known, and Mr. Obama has indicated his contempt for the Chinese. But what I'm starting to think is that the reason that perhaps the reason that Homeland Security is muscling up is not necessarily to beat us up, though that wouldn't bother them. But I'm really inclined to think that they want to make sure that when the Chinese and other creditor nations make a move against the United States, that the liberals who have caused all of these problems will be protected. So this could be a domestic defense force so that Mr. Obama doesn't get hurt, and John Boehner doesn't get hurt, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg doesn't get hurt, and so on and so forth. It could be simply to protect them, and protect them from us or protect them from the Chinese. But I think that they may be in more of a defensive posture. So the idea that they are getting ready to gang up on us and beat us up offensively, going door to door and doing dastardly things, maybe not. Of course, they will have to wait and see. I still believe that before push comes to shove in those arenas, we're going to be long gone. But if you've been to the homework page, then you can see that there is a story by T.W. Clark, Are Chinese Troops Being Stationed in the United States? And that is simply a short paragraph, an admonition to get right with Christ, and then a video and a couple of pictures, or a picture. I was talking to my family about this, and my son suggested to his daughter that she might want to brush up on her Mandarin Chinese. And I said, all you'll have to know how to say in Chinese is, yes, sir. I'm hoping that they, of course, will be joining us on the mezzanine. Here's another item of interest. And this is not related to the Chinese or to the previous story, but simply something that I thought I would pass on for your edification. This is a story out of Florida. The author, Billy Hallowell, the website, theblaze.com. Dated October 4th, city demands residents remove God Bless America signs from their front yards. This is in Bartow, Florida. Apparently, last 4th of July, in conformance with city ordinances, a church passed out signs saying, God Bless America. And this would be a sort of a municipal observance of 4th of July and patriotism and all that sort of thing. And according to this story, some people liked those signs and kept them up, but the ordinance does not provide that they can put a sign up and keep it up for longer than a specific time window, whatever the holiday or celebration is. You can't simply put up a billboard or a sign in your front yard. And so it's 3 months after the 4th of July, and the city believes that some of the 300 signs that were distributed and posted have overstayed their welcome. Local TV station WTVT reported on this and alleged that these homeowners were being threatened with fines. And Billy apparently, or someone else doing some research, apparently contacted the city, and they said, well, the TV station reported that residents would be hit with a $25 per day fine if they fail to remove the signs, but the Bartow Code Enforcement Director, Greg Lamb, told the Blaze that financial penalties were never threatened and that his office does not have the right to enforce them. So it's an interesting little item here, and they're saying that's just the signs, it's not the content. Anybody that had any signs up, no matter what it was, after a certain period of time, according to the ordinances that have been in place for many, many years, they'd have to take them down. The reason I bring this up is because there is a broadly held misconception here in the United States regarding land ownership. Now, when the Lord returns and establishes his kingdom, he is going to own it all. We're not going to have land rights. You're not going to go out, buy a place, build a house, cabin by the lake, or anything like that. But I'm talking about right now. And there is something about this that most people are really misinformed about. You do not own land in America. There are basically two ways of land ownership. One is called allodial, or in allodium, I believe. Allodial title. The other one is called a feudal system, like ancient England. Under a feudal system, the landowner is the king or whatever, and they lease the land out to you. You can build a house on it. You have certain things that you can do and you cannot do, and you have to pay the king every year for the right to live on his land. In America, we also have a feudal system. In fee simple, or fee odd, but in fee simple is feudal land, quote, ownership. You rent the land. The land is owned by, in America, the state corporation or the municipal corporation, probably with roots all the way back to England, because England originally claimed all this land anyway. But you're renting your land. That's why you pay property taxes every year. And if you rent the land, then the people who own the land can tell you what you can or cannot do on it. That's why they can tell you that you are required to have a license for a pet, because the pet is living on their land that you rent from them. You may own the house. as to whether you even own the house. But your rent every year is based on the value of your home, and that there are legal implications to all of that. But they can tell you, because they own the land, what kind of house you can build on it, how big it can be, what color it can be, what signs you can put in the yard, and all that other sort of thing. The fact that historically they haven't enforced that very fiercely is irrelevant. The fact is they can. And also they can tell you if you can cut down their trees that are growing on their land that you rent. And if, as a condition of your living there, you have to maintain the trees or whatever it may be. But they own it all. You do not own land in America. So for these people that come up and start complaining that the city is telling them that they can or cannot, and there's one citizen that made exactly that argument. This is my yard, I'm paying taxes on it, it's my right. And that is not true. It is not your yard, it's the city's yard. They rent it to you. You're paying taxes, that's the rent. You don't purchase the right to do with it what you please. You purchase the right to do what they allow you to do. And if they say that you cannot put a sign on their land, you can't put a sign on their land. There's not a constitutional issue here. Now, I understand that historically there were different structures and people had more land rights. And I also understand, though I don't know if it's true, and at this point it's moot anyway, that you could in fact obtain a allodial title to your land, and then it wouldn't be on the tax rolls because they wouldn't own it. You also wouldn't get fire protection or any of these other things, but who needs that? So anyway, that to say this, you don't own land in America. And that's irrelevant education because in just a very few days, I don't think any of us are going to own anything on this planet, and we wouldn't be any happier. I think, like the rest of you, I'm looking forward to checking out. And according to John McTernan's latest, Mr. Obama and his crowd are far from idle regarding what's going on in the land of Israel. As a matter of fact, Obama is pushing Israel to vacate the Jordan Valley. John writes, no wonder Washington is in chaos. Look what Obama and Kerry are trying to do to God's covenant land. They're trying to bring international forces on the covenant land. Events may get so out of hand in America that God might bring international forces to America. Well, we were just talking about that regarding the Chinese. It's certainly a possibility. The Obama administration is pressing hard for Israel to give up the strategic Jordan Valley in a deal with the Palestinians, according to a senior Palestinian negotiator who was speaking with WorldNet Daily. The current round of U.S. brokered talks is attempting to hash out the details of a plan for the valley. Obama's proposal calls for international forces to maintain security control along with unarmed Palestinian police forces, the PA negotiator said. Israel will retain security posts in some strategic areas according to the U.S. plan. There's an item I posted yesterday speaking of Mr. Obama and his hypocrisy. And in the article written by Charmaine Eggers, she points out that Mr. Obama is attempting to force the Palestinians and the Jews to negotiate, but he won't negotiate here in order to come to some sort of a budgetary settlement with the Republicans in Congress who are insisting that there will be no carte blanche, we'll just plain raise the debt limit. So while Mr. Obama insists that others negotiate, he refuses to. There may be a reason for this. It's politics, of course. And if you look on the letters page, you may find the ugly answer to this. What Mr. Obama apparently wants to do, according to Mac Slavo, is simply let this thing play out to the point that there is a complete impasse, and then he declares a national catastrophe and assumes all political power for himself, making the legal system, the court system, the Congress, and everybody else simply take them out of the loop. I'm in charge now. There may be a provision for that, whether it's going to get to that point, we won't know until the 17th, and 17th is 6 days hence, or, well, 7, I guess. 6 and a wake-up. But if the United States defaults, it will be the end of the U.S. as a superpower, according to Paul Craig Roberts, who was a former U.S. Treasury Undersecretary. And he thinks that one of two things could happen. First, the Federal Reserve, on its own initiative, could lend to the U.S. Treasury, but the Federal Reserve is not federal, has no reserves. What are they lending? They're simply giving it another line of credit. Federal Reserve lent to the U.S. and European banks more than $16 trillion in order to enable them to avoid default. The second possibility would be that President Obama, because of laws that are already on the books, would have the power to declare a national catastrophe and simply assume the leadership of the government. This gets Congress and the courts out of the picture. At that point, there are no limits on the power of the president. That's all he has to do. So if he waits until there's no more time and the debt ceiling is not raised, he could then do it unilaterally, and there are all kinds of other things that he could do. So it depends. I mean, how much of this are the American people going to put up with? And if they decide that they've had enough, what are they going to do about it? As I have pointed out, this being a spiritual crisis and the Lord basically backing Mr. Obama. And I shudder to think of that, but that, I believe, is exactly what's going on. Mr. Obama is in the catbird seat. As long as we continue in our immorality, as long as we continue thinking that putting under God and the Pledge of Allegiance and singing Kumbaya on Sunday mornings is all that God really expects, God is more than willing to, well, I should say that. I think he's reluctant. I think it really does break his heart. But he is still willing to allow Mr. Obama, or even worse, to crush this country. And if that's what it takes to bring us to where we need to be, which is on our faces before his throne of grace in profound repentance. But I spoke yesterday of turning our face to the wall, and most people, when they turn their face to the wall, it's the wall that has the flat screen on it. So, the beat goes on. So I am anticipating that ugly things are going to happen in this country. I don't think we can recover. And I think that Mac in this article has really nailed it. He knows exactly what's going on. It's all about political power. And I think what Mr. Obama wants to do is crush this country, and he said that at the beginning. He said he wanted to completely transform America. He's pretty much done that. It's going to take a little bit longer for things to completely play out, but with the momentum the way it's going right now, it's going to continue to get worse. We're not at any point where we're going to change direction. And I think he has his Homeland Security people because he understands how upset people are going to be and how upset the Chinese probably already are for the fact that they are staring at a $1.7 trillion default by the almighty United States. So, we'll see. Interesting times. That is what we wanted, right? Decisions. I have such a strong temptation to play something like Celebration or something like that. You remember that song, Kool and the Gang, really kind of swings. Well, they're not Christian. Can't do it. Listen in your own, do it for extra credit. Anyway, here is one that I think you're going to enjoy. This is a reprise, a song I played, I think, last January, God of Victory by the Village Church. And I think it's really appropriate for us as we're really staring down the barrel of a double or triple dose of severe tribulation that's about to come up on our shores, that we bear in mind that our God is a God of victory, that all of this is under his control. He knows exactly what he's doing, and it is for his glory and for our ultimate good. So with those thoughts in mind, here is the Village Church, and I will be right back.
I've been set free. I am ransomed through the blood shed for me. I was dead in my transgression, but life you brought to me. I am reconciled through mercy. To the cross I cling. To the cross I cling. No more am I slave to sin, but bought with a price. Redemption that was purchased through the blessed cross that you bore for me. All things in me call for my rejection. All things in you lead my acceptance. I am guilty but pardoned. By grace I've been set free. I am ransomed through the blood you shed for me. I was dead in my transgression, the life you brought to me. I am reconciled through mercy. To the cross I cling. To the cross I cling. Yeah. The cross is where I find death, is where I find life, where mercy found me. The cross is where I find death, is where I find life, where mercy found me. Call for my rejection, all things in you, plead my acceptance, all things in me. Call for my rejection, all things in you, plead my acceptance. I am guilty but pardoned. By grace I've been set free. I am ransomed through the blood you shed for me. I was dead in my transgression, but life you brought to me. I am reconciled through mercy. To the cross I cling. To the cross I
And once again, my standard offer. If you liked what you just heard and you want to hear it again, you can always go to the homework page, www.anakypto.com. Click on homework, and then after today's date, click on the black musical note. You'll hear the music, you'll see the video, you'll have a worship experience. Moving right along. If you've been to Dave Hodges' thecommonsenseshow.com website recently, points out that we're already living in a police state, and we were conquered basically when we allowed the bailouts to go through, when we let Obamacare pass, when the statistics show us that even though we only have 5% of the world's population, we have a quarter of the world's prison population. Said that we were still conquered and still sleeping when we allowed NDAA and the Executive Order 13603 to be passed. More on those shortly. But now he says we're entering into stage 2, civil disobedience. And civil disobedience, I think, is kind of a tough deal here, because you have to disobey from the right posture for the right reasons. And it isn't simply standing up and asserting yourself. The first part of civil disobedience is going to be in any way effective and in any way pleasing to God would be the kind of civil disobedience that Peter and John demonstrated. We must obey God rather than men. And I don't see a whole lot of that yet. Maybe it's too soon to tell. The NDAA is the National Defense Authorization Act. And one of the most scary parts of that, besides the fact that it's financially, it's just obscenely huge, but it allows for the indefinite detention of American citizens without due process at the discretion of the president. That basically turned us into a police state. That is one of several really hideous provisions in this act, and it passed with a vote of 98 to nothing in the Senate. 13603 is seen by some as a return to slavery. Basically, what it provides for is that, according to the executive order, the president or anyone he designates can conscript persons of outstanding experience and ability without compensation in peacetime and times of national emergency. In a nutshell, that means that Barack Obama and people he designates can seize any resource, any property, or any person at any time for any reason, including forcing that person with labor without being paid. So, if it isn't slavery, then it's worse than slavery. I mean, slavery in the biblical sense was a whole lot different than slavery in this sense. A study for another day, perhaps. But that's 13603. And I feel like I've been sucker punched every time I see a car go by and it has an Obama bumper sticker still on it. I expect to see those things maybe in the faculty parking lot at a school, but not out in the real world. And it grieves me. And especially for people that are veterans who still think that Mr. Obama's a good deal. But the slumbering giant apparently is awakening. Awakening slowly, and I think perhaps awakening to the wrong siren song, because a lot of people are simply concerned about our loss of personal autonomy, which I believe should be seen in distinction from freedom. Freedom, legal encouragement or support, or legal ambivalence at best, when you do what's right. That was the issue that Peter and John were dealing with when they went to the Sanhedrin. They were preaching the Word of God. And Caiaphas and his crowd were saying, you're trying to bring this man's blood on us? We told you, we ordered you not to speak in this man's name. And Peter and John said, we must obey God rather than men. The reference, with which I'm sure you're all familiar, Acts chapter 4, and at verse 18, they called them and commanded them not to speak at all nor teach in the name of Jesus. But Peter and John answered and said to them, whether it is right in the sight of God to listen to you more than God, you judge, for we cannot but speak the things which we have seen and heard. So at that point, they said, sorry, we're not going to go along with it. Turn the page. And in Acts chapter 5, starting at about verse 22, we see that the apostles are in trouble again. They get hauled before the same guys, and the high priest asks them, didn't we strictly command you not to teach in this name? And Peter and the other apostles answered and said, in verse 29, we ought to obey God rather than men. So when man requires you to do something that runs counter to a command of God, simply being in submission to God would compel you to civil disobedience. But I'm not seeing that here. I mean, I just don't think we're at that point yet, and I am very much inclined to believe that we're not going to see that until we see Christians, as a matter of conscience, standing before schools and preaching the gospel, telling the kids the truth about God, and especially stopping abortion, which needs, the stopping there needs to begin in our churches. It's been pointed out many times that the churches are simply not interested. There is nothing in it for them for saving babies. A unpopular stand against the culture and against the law. And if you go and take a principled stand in front of an abortion clinic in order to prevent babies from being killed, you will be hauled off and thrown into prison. And most Christians are unwilling to do that. And I suppose I'm indicting myself also. I have taken a stand. I didn't get arrested. I got close, but they did not haul me off. But it was pretty unpleasant. But at that point, I became very active in local right to life, and I realized that the right to lifers themselves, and even a lot of the Christian right to lifers, want the fun of, like that 60s sort of a thing. They want to engage the culture. They want to be involved in a cause, but they don't want to take any risk, and they simply don't want to make any waves. And I understood early on that if we did not win the war for the lives of the unborn in the churches, we were never going to win it in the population at large, for a simple reason. Jesus said, at least that's my understanding of his words, when he says, what you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. What you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. The binding and loosing in heaven is the spiritual aspect of it. If we bind it spiritually, it will be bound on earth in the natural. So within the Christian community, I believe, we have to bind the spirit of child killing, and it's not being done. Christians themselves, and I've talked even to elders and one guy who's now a pastor, who seemed to think that family planning was okay. He didn't see it in the context of slaughtering children made in God's image, which is what it is. Maybe that's a discussion for another day too, because we're just about out of time. It's been suggested before that Obama and his fellow pilgrims are following a playbook that's maybe 50, 60, 80 years old, stuff that was tried back in World War II and pre-World War II Germany by a certain Adolf Hitler. Well, Now the End Begins comes up with a story that indicates that, yes, he is following that same playbook. Ecclesiastes 1:9, still in the Bible. The thing that has been is that which shall be. That which is done is that which shall be done. Nothing new under the sun. The old newsreels that we used to watch showed what was going on in Nazi Germany. Maybe you've seen some of those. They write, remember how mad you got when you saw the German people and the Jews doing almost nothing to stem the rising tide of what was obviously, to us now anyway, corrupt and tyrannical government? And you probably asked yourself, as I have asked myself, why didn't they do anything about it? Well, the answer was kind of displayed for us in the last day or so when Mr. Obama called some of the conservative news heads into the White House for a little talking to. According to the Associated Press, the U.S. government's aggressive prosecution of leaks and efforts to control information are having a chilling effect on journalists and government whistleblowers, according to a report released Thursday on U.S. press freedoms under the Obama administration. 6 government employees to date, also 2 contractors, have been targeted for prosecution under the 1917 Espionage Act for accusations that they leaked classified information to the press. There were just 3 such prosecutions under all previous U.S. presidents. It might be pointed out here that with the information age being what it is, and it's so easy to get huge amounts of information, put it on a flash drive and smuggle it someplace, as Mr. Snowden obviously demonstrated. But in my own lifetime, the infamous John Walker, who was at the time that I was in radio school, commanding officer of the radio school, and then he went on to the USS Niagara Falls. I caught up with him a couple of years later, not knowing, of course, that he was involved in industrial strength espionage and surrendering a lot of secret communication information to the Soviets at that time. And I don't know if he was prosecuted under this or not. The story that's being presented here, however, to stay back on track, is that Mr. Obama is going after the press. And it was disclosed also yesterday, I saw the story in the news, can't pull it up right now, to the effect that he called some of the conservative sources of news into the White House, had a little discussion with them also, and he wants to make certain that the word gets out there that anybody who spills the beans on him, casts him in a negative light, etc., etc., will have a price to pay. The Committee to Protect Journalists conducted its first examination of U.S. press freedoms amid the Obama administration's unprecedented number of prosecutions of government sources and seizures of journalists' records. And this isn't just Obama, by the way. I mean, we've seen lots of stories where something happens involving your local police, and people standing by have their video cameras or their cell phone cameras or whatever, and the cops go and confiscate it. Hillary Clinton made news about a week and a half ago for a similar stunt. So it is understandable that they would want to keep the raps on their dastardly deeds. But on the other hand, I really wonder why, since it seems like they've got everybody cowed and they own the justice system anyway. I mean, when you've got a guy like Eric Holder heading up justice in the United States, I don't think you have a whole lot to fear. Quote of interest in this story, and I commend it for your perusal. This is at Now the End Begins, NTEB, website www.nowtheendbegins.com, WordPress blog. In the Obama administration's Washington, government officials are increasingly afraid to talk to the press. This by a certain Leonard Downey Jr., who's a former executive editor of the Washington Post. He is now a journalism professor at Arizona State University. He continues, the administration's war on leaks and other efforts to control information are the most aggressive I've seen since the Nixon administration, when I was one of the editors involved in the Washington Post's investigation of Watergate. So, more good stuff in the pipeline. I'm glad we're checking out. And this just in, I got a link to frontpagemag.com. An interesting story, an interesting perspective. The writer, a certain David Horowitz, and David Horowitz is writing about the threat we face. This is part of a speech that he delivered at the Kohler Conference of the Bradley Foundation, which has been revised and edited. You may have seen it already, but he writes that he was born at the beginning of the Second World War into a family of high school teachers who were members of the Communist Party, and therefore were actually part of a vast conspiracy dedicated to the destruction of the country. His parents and grandparents were on board with this thing. They were card-carrying Democrats. They did not see themselves as enemies of the state per se. They saw themselves as transcending corruption with something that they thought was significantly better. And of course, the end justifying the means. A fairly extensive piece, but has a lot of current history in it that you may find challenging and maybe a few new thoughts in here. I try to look at these things through a spiritual lens, and there are a couple of spiritual lessons in here for us. One of the things he points out, and I've said this before, talking about leftist in the not necessarily pejorative sense, I think they would agree themselves that they are to left of center. They think that's a good thing. But I've pointed out that they are not stupid people. David Horowitz agrees. They may be delusional, but they are not stupid. They know what they can say. They know what they can get away with. They know what their objectives are. They are crystal clear on where they're going, how they want to get there. They have their game plans. And telling stories, lies, whoppers, misdirection, or just acting like they're bumbling and stumbling, if it gets them closer to their goal, they will do it. But there is a marked difference, he points out, between the radicals of the 60s and the radical movement that Mr. Obama is part of. Back in the 60s, they said what they thought. They blurted out what they wanted. They wanted a revolution. They wanted it now. And they were actually very upfront about warning people as to what they intended and how they intended to proceed. It was because they spilled the beans on their goal that they didn't get very far. And I think we can learn from that also, because with the truckers and the Larry Klayman Judicial Watch rally, and probably there will be one or two others that pop up if time permits. They're being very upfront, very open about what their objectives are, where they want to go, what they want to do, what they want to accomplish, and they will get thwarted at every turn, because one of the rules of any kind of combat or any kind of an engagement like that is you don't tell the other side what your strategy is. Play a little chess. Don't plan 5 moves ahead and then tell your opponent what you've planned. It will not work. So anyway, the David Horowitz story, you may find it of interest. I'll post a link on the letters page if you want to run that one down and check that one out. A little Comet Ison update, and I'm still not on board with the idea that comets are harbingers. A lot has been made of the comet that appeared looking like a sword hanging over Jerusalem the year before it was destroyed in AD 70. But it seems to me that comets appear on a more or less regular basis, catastrophes occur on a more or less regular basis, and try to map them one-to-one and say this comet was a harbinger of this catastrophe or something, I think is counterproductive at best. Let's just go with what the scriptures have to say, and if we see things in a progression, biblically, and the scripture says A is going to happen, and then B is going to happen, and then C is going to happen, then when we see A coming, we know that B and C are behind it and in sequence, and we really don't need to, I don't think, go too far beyond that. One more item before we close. And I think this may have prophetic import. The National Security Agency has built a $2 billion mega spy center. I think you've heard the story before. The facility is located in Utah. What you have probably not heard is that within the last 13 months, at least 10 electric power surges, each costing about $100,000 in damages, has occurred in this facility. The reason I bring this up is because obviously intrusive electronic surveillance is a key point in the emerging New World Order and what the Antichrist plans for the whole world. And this appears to me to be one of those things that happens over and over again as God kind of puts the brakes on them a little bit. But they're getting close to a solution, and when they implement this thing and roll it out, it will be one world surveillance. And I think I mentioned that yesterday. They're also talking about a ubiquitous Wi-Fi computers that will analyze crowds in real time using facial recognition, retinal scans, all kinds of other stuff, so that wherever you go, whoever you talk to, whatever you purchase, whatever you do, perhaps what even you are intending to do, can be gleaned by these all-intrusive computer systems, and there will indeed be no privacy. This is not for the children of God. This is not for the bride of Christ. So I'm inclined to think that the reason these things are having their glitches until we get out of here. And then at that point, have a nice world. Well, my dear friends, once again, we're out of time. In fact, we're a little bit over time, but Blog Talk Radio is good to me. They let me stretch things just a bit. Hey, I love you guys lots. I can't wait until that trumpet sounds and I can see you all face to face. I think it's going to be real soon. I don't think it's going to be this coming weekend, but we'll discuss that on tomorrow's program, I suppose. Anyway, I'm still looking at Cheshvan 17 as it was in the days of Noah. Please be ready, be ready. If you have spiritual house cleaning that needs to be taken care of, take care of it now. If there's any good deeds that you want to do, now's the time to do them, okay? So get out there, live the life. Simply listen to the voice of the Lord, go where he tells you to go. Follow Jesus Christ. This is an exciting time to be alive, and we are really honored to be part of it. Anyway, that's my program. See you guys mañana on WTVO at noon for the short program. and right here on Blog Talk Radio at your convenience. Feel free to send email. Hope to see you soon. As I've said, bye for now.
Got a feeling in my bones, I got a feeling.